name's JC McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good afternoon. We're going to get our meeting started. So welcome to our 19th Public Advisory Committee meeting. Today, after our introductions, the focus of the meeting is going to be Casey will be going over some thoughts that we've been looking at for construction staging, some examples of things. This is not the way that we'll be doing it, but it's just an example of different ways that the project team has been looking at that. After that, Christine will be going over where we stand in the environmental process and what we're going to be doing moving forward, and then talk about the next steps. And after that, Sandy's here to give a little update on the City of Hartford's Capital Gateway Master Plan. So we have some new members here. We have from the State Police, Lieutenant Eric Murphy. We have Murray. Yeah, see, I even just said it. I just practiced it. I know. And I said it was nice to give me an easy name, but now I even screwed that up. Bert, maybe I should actually be able to see the screen. Bert Orr from St. Francis Hospital. Natasha Strickland from CREC, over here. Keith Chapman over here from Town of East Hartford. And also as an alternate to East Hartford, Rich Teal. And Ariana Beish from Trinity College, there in the back. And so we'll start right off with Casey talking about our construction staging.
Thanks, Kevin. Good afternoon, everybody. And I really hope we're not going to be 50 minutes in this section. I did bring my water bottle just in case, but I'm hoping we won't take quite that long. So, the conversation on this really starts with FHWA's transportation demand management strategies. And it gives us kind of a family of tools that we can take from and use elements to ensure that not only are we building the highway in an efficient manner, but we're also communicating to the public, we're finding the right ways to move traffic around and to offer other options for getting people into the city. A lot of what we talk about within this section will be on the temporary traffic control portion. That's where the construction staging part really comes in, but I'll also talk a little bit about how you can look at the broader operation of the system to provide some improvements, as well as communicating with the public. So those temporary traffic control strategies really get into the kind of nuts and bolts of the construction staging. This is a cool image that our friends at DOT gave us for something they're doing down in Waterbury, where they're doing a big, long temporary bridge over the Naugatuck River. So it's really looking at how you're constructing little pieces of the project and moving stuff around. And when we talk about how things are built, I'll throw out terms at you: conventional versus accelerated construction. And in reality, this project will end up being built as really a mix of both. So that conventional construction really talks about, or is based on, maintaining all the lanes of traffic, kind of moving traffic over a little bit, building a little bit more. Typically ends up with a longer duration. It can involve lots of temporary roadways or temporary structures, which can add to the construction cost. Now again, i84 will likely be a mix of that with some accelerated portions as well. There's some examples of some recent significant projects around the Northeast that were done kind of in that same manner, really mostly conventional with some accelerated pieces. And many of you are probably familiar with the Q Bridge down in New Haven, the recently completed Waterbury widening in i84, and of course the Central Artery, where they did take down an elevated urban viaduct like we're dealing with here in Hartford. So I'm going to walk through one scenario for how we could construct this lowered highway alternative we've been talking about for the last few years. And it'll all really start with the relocation of CT Fast Track and most importantly the railroad. That's the thing that, if you remember, really allows us to lower the highway to the low grade passing beneath all those city streets. And in many places, we will utilize what we call offline construction. That's where we build the new highway outside the footprint of the existing facility. But for sure, this will have a lot of additional engineering and analysis throughout the design phase as we get towards construction. So I'm gonna go to the next slide in a second. It's a map with a lot of colors and a lot of lines. There's not a test later. So what I'm gonna do is I'll explain the legend, but I'll pick out kind of one key point for each phase and kind of point you to something that we think is interesting as we move through the various phases. But I, again, don't really expect everyone to grasp every significant detail. So again, we're highlighting here. I'm gonna pull up the laser pointer so you can see. So we've got some different colors here on our legend identifying pieces of work. For example, the red railroad, the blue being the proposed roadways, whether it's I-84 or the locals, and the orange being the temporary road work. So again, that first phase is really focused on constructing the railroad, constructing CT Fast Track, getting those online so that they're utilized during construction to minimize the number of single occupant vehicle trips. And it does include, this phase does include some local work, local road work and I-84 work there in the eastern part of the project. So what I'm going to do for each of these is just, again, high level, summarize that work that's going on, and then show you where I-84 traffic would be. So for this first phase, I-84 traffic would be unchanged. You would kind of follow your way through existing I-84 eastbound, and coming away from the I-91 interchange, you follow, go under Asylum like you do today, under Broad, and come around on the viaduct. So no changes there. Where there would be a change with the construction of the railroad would be, in particular for Capitol Avenue, a local road there in the western part of the corridor. And so the reason is it would be impacted by the railroad construction. So I'm going to show you a couple images just to kind of convey why. So this is from our trusty 3D model. So we're actually looking east underneath the Sisson Avenue ramps. That's what's over our head here. So we're looking east along Capitol Avenue. You can see some of the industrial buildings there in the background. So this here is the CT Fast Track bridge that was recently built. And right behind it is that existing railroad bridge. So you can see today it's already kind of a low clearance thing. Now, when we rebuild the railroad, in order to lower the highway and put the local streets over it, we have to build it lower than the railroad is today. So when it comes through, it's right here. So for that reason, we're no longer able to keep Capitol Avenue in its current configuration. And so we've developed a couple different ways to allow traffic on that west-east axis to get in and out of the city. And so I've highlighted here on this map 3 potential temporary road locations that we would use to move that traffic around as we zoom in a little bit. And again, it would be that red dashed segment there that would be closed as Capitol Avenue currently exists. No businesses would be affected by that loss of access. So we're really talking about ensuring west to east mobility is maintained. And we, through these temporary roads would offer folks a couple different ways to get into and out of the city. Now there's certainly additional work to be done looking at the various intersections that it impacts, but generally speaking, we're looking to try and provide for that capacity elsewhere as we construct these temporary roads. So what I'm going to do now is, as we culminate this phase, that phase 1 we expect to take in the vicinity of about 4 years. So given the length of the railroad construction, the follow-on phases are a little shorter, comprising mostly highway work. There may be 1 to 2 construction seasons each. So I'm going to just flip back to the next stage and just kind of go back and forth once or twice just to kind of show you what we're doing. And the phase 2 really focuses on constructing a big chunk of the I-84 here in the western part, and then the local road network in Asylum Hill. So if I flip back one more time, just kind of see what's going on there. And The big change to I-84 traffic is that there'll be some temporary roadways to deviate traffic around so that you build it. If you keep your eye on this section here that I just said we'd be building, you can kind of see how the two paths kind of deviate around it to allow us to construct that being eastbound and then westbound. Now, I-84 traffic would essentially be the same east of Sigourney Street, but again, you can kind of see how we've created some space in here to build that new section of highway. Now, the big thing I wanted to touch on in this phase was the Asylum westbound off-ramp. So that's a very critical cog in the transportation infrastructure here in the city. We would keep that open until such a time that the new off-ramp to Asylum Hill, which goes up to Cogswell Street, would be open. So that just something I wanted to point out as we build that piece. We would look to maintain an avenue for that significant traffic volume to get into the city. So then we come down and we construct a lot of the local roads around Bushnell Park, in and around where that big Capitol Avenue, Asylum Avenue exit is. So that you can kind of see where the blue's happening here. And in order to do that, we kind of do something interesting where we're going to push both eastbound and westbound I-84 traffic underneath the existing Broad Street Bridge. And I'm going to show you how and why we do that. But you can kind of see here as I illustrate eastbound how it jogs over to get under that existing Broad Street Bridge. And that's all on existing infrastructure up there. That's up on the viaduct we have today. So here's that location right here on Broad Street. And this image is, we're looking east. This is Broad Street. So this is our existing I-84 westbound. And you can kind of see the width of the bridge is pretty wide, and that's because it has this existing on-ramp coming in on the left. That's coming in from Asylum and Capitol. And so we're able to put both directions of the highway in there and potentially convert this on-ramp to an off-ramp. And the purpose for that is so we can start to demolish those big eastbound viaduct structures that are up here. So this being the existing I-84 eastbound, and then here's that off-ramp that goes to Capitol and Asylum. And by demolishing those, we can start to build those new local roads in and around the Bushnell Park area. So then we're kind of moving west, looking at this stretch really between Broad and Sigourney Streets, along with the local roads that cross in those areas. And again, you'll see as I animate this, there'll be some temporary roads in place to move the I-84 traffic out of the way so that we can build. If you keep your eye kind of here, you can see we've kind of shifted things out of the way in order to be able to build that. And then the last piece, so that really completes the lower highway, the I-84 construction. So the final piece is ramp construction and completing Capitol Avenue and some of those local road overpasses, taking them out of their temporary detours or configurations and putting the final condition in place. And one of the things that I'd point out here, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about accelerated construction here in the next couple slides, but those Sigourney ramps are opportunities for us to look at accelerated construction so that when we change it over, because right now you've got, your highways up here, you come down to Sigourney. In the future, you'll be down here coming up to Sigourney Street. Using some of these accelerated techniques will allow us to make sure we minimize any closures, whether it's during the summer periods, over a weekend, things like that, to really expedite the time period and minimize disruption to traffic. So and now our eastbound and westbound I-84 would be on their proposed final alignments. So that'll be exciting. So with that stage complete, we're essentially done with the construction of the lowered highway. Now what would follow would likely be some of these features that we talked about a lot. The capping would be constructed here at the end, a potential multi-use path that essentially follows the busway here on the south side of I-84 would be constructed then as well. Now in terms of accelerated construction, just to explain a little bit more for those that may not be familiar, this is where you really look to expedite the construction of certain features, including potentially including partial or full road closures, to really let the contractor get in there and work a little bit quicker. And it can be a little bit more costly, but it can really help reduce the duration and the burden on the traveling public. Some good examples here from around the state. Many of you may remember just a couple years ago they did I84 down in Southington. That was the bridge over Marion Avenue. My wife made fun of me because I went down from our house in Bristol to watch some of that. And then there's also one going on right now, Route 1 in Stamford, as well as for those of you that drive on 91 through Rocky Hill, you'll see the bridge between exits 23 and 24. So again, the summary for kind of what I went through is really to kind of drive home that, we think we've identified a feasible, practicable way this to be built. There's certainly still details to be worked out, and that will be worked out as we start to work with our new next generation traffic model that we've been coordinating with the city on the development of, and we'll be able to use that to test some of these different phases, make sure we're adequately moving traffic around the city. Again, that mix of conventional and accelerated elements, and we really feel this doesn't have to have a negative impact on the economy and the people of the city. And to that end, we've worked with our partners at Federal Highway. Thanks again, Ted, for providing these. We have just a couple examples, and I think you guys have the printouts with all these links, so I won't go into every single case study we've done, but just one kind of good example of something, that can come positively out of these projects is on that I-880, which is the west approach of the Bay Bridge out in San Francisco. They had done a big seismic refit and essentially had to reconstruct the whole thing basically in the aftermath of that Northridge earthquake. But so that carried about 280,000 vehicles, so well above what we did. They rebuilt it in place over the course of about 6 years. And one of the big successful results was the number of minority and women-owned small business enterprises that came up. Such a big contract, all these federal aid contracts require a significant, we call it DBE, presence. And so this really enabled several successful firms to start up and have carried on and are still successful today. So that's sort of just one example of how this can be a positive impact in the economy. And that's just a set of newsletters from their project. So yeah, I talked a lot there about temporary traffic control. That was just one of the family of strategies. And the other, one of the other ones is transportation operations. This is really looking at the broader transportation system and how can you improve other modes, how can you ensure that there's other ways for people to make that same trip, or do they even have to make it at all? And it could include, I'll talk a little bit about transit on the next slide. It talks about communicating through the DOT's Transportation Demand Management Center, understanding where the delays are and getting it out there, other options for people to take. And one of the big points to having that first phase include the railroad and the CT fast track construction is to make sure they're open during the highway work so that people have an option to take another way into the city to come to work. And certainly a lot of other municipalities or states have looked at potential fare reductions. That's certainly something we'll consider here. And then the promotion, making sure people understand that these opportunities are all out there. And unfortunately, this video, which I tested about 10 times back at the office and 5 times at DOT, does not appear to work here, but if you take my word for it, it is from the Q Bridge. And basically what they did is when they had a major traffic shift, they would publish a little video on their website that basically shows you how to drive that new transition. This, for example, was if you were going on I-95 southbound, getting off onto Route 34, you were used to doing it a certain way for so many years. This was basically published, well before that traffic shift took place, so that you kind of envision what would happen under the new scenario. And that is part of the kind of broader family of tools focused basically under public outreach. So this is making sure that the general public, as well as those specific motorists, understand what those options that we just talked about in the last 2 strategies, what those are, how they can use them. So that includes, press, media, especially, today, social media, communicating those traffic shifts well in advance so that people understand them. If there are any temporary closures, it would be that would be, again, well communicated to ensure that folks understand what's happening. I'm sure the set of tools that we'll have at our disposal will be different from a technology perspective than we have today. We will, make a pledge to stay up on best practices and adhere to what the best tools of the day are. And again, that promotion of other modes, like I talked about on transit, be really important in minimizing the number of trips. And then that last bullet, I mean, coordinating with the major employers, key stakeholders, the folks that, know the people who are coming into the city, know where they're coming from, and making sure we work with them to help understand how we can help them get folks in and out in the most efficient manner. So I do think we probably have some time for some questions. If there were any, maybe we'll take a couple minutes. Go ahead.
Sorry, two questions. The first is, I see about 5 phases here, and I'm just wondering, despite your best efforts, is there any one phase that you think, which phase do you think will be most disruptive to the motoring public or the local neighborhoods?
That I don't have the answer to that question. So we, through the city, we've developed a new traffic model that we're really rolling out this summer, and I think we're really going to sink our teeth into testing the details like that at that point. So, I think we're going to continue to make every effort to make them all as cause least harm, if you will.
Okay, and then my other question was the video that didn't work.
Yep.
So do you have any way of tracking, really how often people actually clicked on that or used it as a resource, or I'm just wondering if it was effective?
Sure, that's a really good question. I can reach out to our friends at the DOT Communication Department, and I'm sure they can track how many people use it. And, we had heard good things from people we talked to about the project that recommended that we show that. So I think it was relatively successful.
As I say, tell them that we'll put a separate link to the video online.
We can put a link to that online as well, so anyone can see it.
Thank you.
Have you guys considered, in lieu of reduced or free fares on CT Fast Track, when that's going on, letting cars drive on the Fast Track lanes as another option?
That specific idea has not come up, but I would certainly say that we would look at opportunities that we have. That, I believe, would come with some red tape associated with it, but I appreciate the thought behind it.
I mean, yeah, it could be less costly to the state, really, and more convenient for the people at the same time.
No, I totally take your point, yeah. Tony?
Nancy, you seem to be assuming that this is the accepted preferred alternative by average Sub-Ed. Is that the case?
So the idea was to communicate how this lowered highway alternative, which is one of, so it and the no build are essentially the two build alternatives going into the NEPA document. So it was really to communicate how our lowered highway alternative, so there are still 3 potential interchange options. They don't differ a lot in terms of how each of them would be constructed. So it is not this point as a formal preferred alternative.
When is that from?
Christine, so spoiler alert, Christine will talk you all through the DEIS process and let you know when that will happen.
That's what we're waiting on.
Better.
I think I heard you say that the reconstruction of the highway, the railroad portion will be about 4 years. Is there interruption to existing rail during that section?
No, the rail construction is all offline, so we do anticipate a pretty clean switch over there at the end.
And then my comment would be, I pray that you would never consider putting the public in their vehicles on the CT Fast Track. I can't think of a more crazy idea to affect getting people in and out of the city efficiently.
Noted.
Just a couple of things. As far as the public transportation, it would seem to me like, you mentioned boosting that a little bit. Rate reductions, incentives to put people on public transportation. I think this is the opportunity to really change mindset for a lot of people and go forward into the future. So I really highly encourage that kind of communication or any education that can be done beforehand. But the other modes of transportation, it would be really nice if prior to the construction happening, that there could be some dedicated dollars for increased bike lanes between at least the contiguous towns so we can really improve some of those avenues and people would feel comfortable taking that. So I think just encouraging people to take bikes without providing some of the infrastructure that's still needed would not be, you're not going to see a bang for your buck. You've got to have the funds beforehand to encourage that type of behavior. And the last is, as far as on, you noted workforce development on here, and the potential for that. I think now even some programs need to be started to be able to make sure that specifically some of the people who are within our city can benefit from that.
Sure.
So job trainings and other stuff has to start way before this starts, so you've got, I would assume, enough people that can actually work on this job and get it done.
That's a really
I
good
think
point.
there's going to be more than 5 or 10 people who are going to work on this.
All good points, and I know Marcy could probably speak more to that. We have been, I think it's fair to say, relatively proactive about reaching out to some of the various NRZs and have tried to provide them with as much information we could about the employment opportunities. And on the bike facilities, the off-site improvement stuff, I actually did have a bullet, I kind of glossed over it, that would certainly be part of that transportation operation family of strategies, is to build and provide those off-site improvements that allow people to take those other modes. Yeah, it's not just a like blind suggestion to take the mode. It's actually figuring out some ways to ensure the infrastructure is there. Sorry.
Has any consideration been given to how high-speed rail might fit into this plan?
Yes. When we were working through some of the specifics there for the station, including sizing, the spatial needs, including looking at the platforms, it's all done in mind with that finalized NEC future plan, which does include the potential for that big 12-car train on the big express run along the primary northeast corridor. So yeah, it's been done with that in mind.
And it would continue on north and east on the present rail right-of-way?
I think that's right. Don't quote me on that, although it's going to go up on the internet. But yeah, I believe it goes up to Springfield and makes a right.
Right on the present.
Yeah. So I think with that, I'm going to turn you over to Christine to talk about environmental documentation.
Thank you. So I just want to give everybody an overview on where we are on the NEPA-SEPA process. I feel like we've been at this for many years. We defined the purpose and need a couple of years ago. We had scoping meetings back in 2015. We've been documenting existing conditions and going through this extensive alternatives development process. And where we are now is we're really in the throes of preparing the DEIS for the project. And to break that down in a little more detail, the DEIS, as you've heard me before, includes several technical reports as well as a slew of chapters. And those chapters are basically summaries of the technical analysis in the technical reports. We've got FHWA and Connecticut DOT reviewing those chapters and tech reports, cooperating and participating agencies reviewing those tech reports and chapters. That'll all undergo, the DEIS will undergo a legal sufficiency review before it goes out for public availability. And we will be distributing the DEIS. We will be publishing a notice of availability in the Federal Register, and that will be the public's opportunity to review the DEIS. So that's the second column there is a public review and comment. The DEIS will be out for public review. It'll be up on the internet. We'll be at several repositories. There'll be different formats that you can see it in. We're going to be using that time, about a 45-day public comment period, so that we can hear your comments, listen to your comments, and subsequently address your comments. We're going to have a public hearing, at least one public hearing, perhaps more, and you'll be able to make your comments heard, ask questions at that public hearing, submit emails with your comments, online with your comments, traditional U.S. mail with your comments. So there'll be very many opportunities and avenues for you to provide us with your comments and questions. And after we get those, we're going to address those comments in the final EIS and the record of decision, or as we call a ROD, record of decision. And the final EIS and the ROD is basically going to be identification of the preferred alternative and identification of all the impacts, as well as mitigation commitments and environmental mitigation that we have to adhere to in compliance with regulatory requirements. To give you an idea of the time frame of when that document is going to be available for public review, in about summer next year, 2020, that document will be ready for public review. That's based on the current schedule. So we're looking at the EIS, the draft EIS.
And the hearings follow?
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be available at least 30 days, probably 45 days for your review before we actually have the public hearing. So again, the document will be available summer of 2020, probably early fall, around September of 2020, we'll be having the public hearing or hearings.
That's when it will be published in the Federal Register?
Yes, yeah, it'll be out for, there's a lot of iterations of reviews prior to getting it to that point, so that's why it sounds like a long time away, but there's a lot that has to happen between now and then. So I just want to give you just a major takeaway of what the NEPA-SEPA process is and what it isn't. Obviously, it's to identify your preferred alternative, to document the impacts, to identify the mitigation that's required to concur with regulatory requirements. The preferred alternative, as we've heard, is going to be in alignment with your local interchange configurations that are going to be further identified and compared and evaluated in the DEIS. We're going to introduce some design features like the multimodal station, the CT fast track, and the local area, particularly around the Trident. There'll be some conceptual designs in there. And then in the ROD, again, the major point of the record of decision is to identify the environmental commitments and the environmental mitigation so that we're in compliance with all our regulations. But when we get the ROD, it might conclude the end of the NEPA and the SEPA process, but it's not the end of your involvement and public involvement and public comment. We're going to have a detailed final design process. We're going to have working sessions. We might continue the PAC meetings throughout that as well. So there'll be many opportunities after the ROD and after the DEIS public hearing that we can hear your comments and you can get involved in the final design and how the ultimate final design of the project shapes out. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to talk about next steps, unless anybody has any questions.
Oops, oh, she already got there. So as Christine said, you know, we're at a point where we're kind of in a production phase of the EAS, and we've had these many years of working towards getting the input and doing the analysis, and a lot of it is now in the production mode. But while we do that, there are ways that the public stays involved, or we're going to be continuing to provide information through our e-bulletins, newsletters, and such. And then as we go through and publish the DEIS, that's the opportunity for review and for the public to attend the hearing and through the process that they talked about. And just to reinforce that, you know, she identified how the different stages of this being the environmental process, and that the public involvement process will continue as we take these details into design. And with that, if there's any questions, if not, we'll look to go on to the city. And where is Casey to shut this one out? Cityscape, okay. So Sandy will want to come up, and the city will go over their work on their capital gateway master plan.
Just use that, or you can use that if you want. Do you want to use the laser pointer?
No. All right, well, thank you. I'm happy to be able to present this work to you that the city has been undertaking for, I guess, about 2.5 years, close to 3 years. In 2016, as i84 project was really moving along, and we really looked at what the impact was going to be right at the heart of the project, where the rail station is being moved, you've got the highway going underground. We wanted to be sure that we could really preserve value to the city with this I-84 project. Oh, wrong one. There, sorry. So really the purpose of this effort was for us to develop an urban design strategy, and also as part of that, identify recommended infrastructure elements for I-84 and beyond I-84. The goal is really to maximize the benefits to the city of Hartford, and what that really means is promoting economic development, situating ourselves so that this project gives a good return, that we can capitalize on the investment that's being made in 84 to really knit the city back together in this area and end with a really large benefit for the city of Hartford. The consultant who assisted us in this work is WSP, formerly Parsons Brigham, and if you've been coming to all these meetings, you've heard them speak at a couple of the meetings. So there were a couple different elements of the work that they did. One big piece of it was peer review, looking at the work that was coming out of the I-84 work, but you know, obviously the I-84 work is being done for the state DOT, and the interests and the goals of the state DOT are a little different than the city's interests and goals. And so this gave us an opportunity to look at everything with that different viewpoint through the expertise of the consultant. So we were looking at where were the ramps located, local access, the intermodal transit center location, and really how we can put all this together to improve placemaking. So we worked with the DOT team throughout the project and came up then finally with this Capital Gateway concept plan, which I can send a link to DOT that maybe can be sent out to the PAC that is a link to our final Capital Gateway plan, concept plan, which has these several elements to it. Talks about strategies for what we wanted to see happen there, infrastructure recommendations, design guidelines, and then financing and implementation strategies. So I'll talk generally about how all those elements have come together to create this Capital Gateway plan. And I do want to mention that our Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed the Capital Gateway plan. At the first meeting, they declined to approve it because they wanted to see some changes in it. And at the second meeting, they did approve the proposal, and I'll show you what they approved in this meeting. In terms of infrastructure design, there have been three different elements. What do we want the urban street network to look like in this vicinity? Where should the intermodal transit center be, and then how do we make that CT fast track connection? Because these to us were all the key elements in this central area. And I didn't really point out before, you know, we're really talking from about Broad Street to north of the proposed bus center as the area of the Capital Gateway, as we've defined it. So in terms of the urban street network, some of the things that we came up with out of the peer review and that we think have improved the overall project for all parties is, number one, to extend Garden Street. If you remember back, there was a time where a Garden Street extension was not included as part of the project. And our consultants were able to assist with figuring out how the grades would work and how that could work to the benefit of the project. We've also identified the importance of a Farmington Avenue extension, which you can see. I don't like having two screens because I like to point to the screen. Farmington Avenue, rather than intersecting with Asylum, it turns south and connects with the new roadway along the edge of Bushnell Park. We think that's important to improve the developability of some of the ground that's made available as part of the project. And then Bushnell West had been called Road A and Road B. They were two separate roads. Now it's one road that makes close to a 90-degree turn there. Can everybody tell what I'm talking about? Should I use the laser pointer? I'm not good with laser pointers, that's why I'm hesitating to do that. You can tell? Okay. Next, looking at the intermodal transit center. The intermodal center actually consists of two separate facilities. The relocated train station, which is located north of Asylum Avenue above the newly relocated train track. So it's the red square in this drawing. The bus facility would be located either just east of the lowered highway, or it could be located over the highway. So that's the blue. The solid blue is the bus location. The slashed blue is an alternative location over the highway. There's some question as to how Homeland Security and other agencies look at locating a facility like that over a highway. So that's why we're showing the two options. What's really key with this whole idea is these two facilities need to work as one, as an intermodal center. We've had for a number of years, we've had the train facility and the bus facility coincident, and we don't want to lose that value. We know that a lot of people value that. It makes it a more powerful connection. So the pedestrian connection that we make along Garden Street between these two is going to be very important. We want it to feel like when somebody comes to the bus center, they've arrived at the intermodal center. They're just walking down a corridor to get to the trains and vice versa. And it's the kind of distances you walk in other train stations that you walk in an airport all the time. And we think that it is workable to have it designed in that way. CT Fast Track is really essential to the intermodal facility. We believe it must connect to the intermodal facility. It seems most feasible for it to connect to the bus facility, make all the transfers at that location, make it very convenient for people to go from the busway to the train, and vice versa. So we are showing the busway coming underground into that train station and then continuing downtown along Church Street. DOT has shown some other options for the busway, but we believe that this one will work most effectively for the transit service and will be most beneficial to the Capitol Gateway. Okay. The next couple of things we looked at in terms of urban design were related to highway capping and open space, and then the adaptive reuse of Union Station. In terms of capping considerations, we wanted to mitigate noise and visual impacts. We did not want to build a lot of buildings on the cap because we know how difficult and expensive that is. But we wanted to use the capping to be able to attract Class A type development in the terra firma on-ground locations where development could be supported. With just one exception, and that's right across Asylum Street from Union Station, we would not propose any building on the cap. At that location, we think it's important that there be some type of building there. It's a key gateway into downtown. So I'm going to go through the variety of different open spaces. I'll go over it pretty quickly, but just to show you some of the thinking behind the open spaces. So this, the red shaded area is what's being called Capitol Way, Area C. That would be built over top of those ramps that are exiting from the highway, and they exit right opposite of Bushnell Park. So it's important to mitigate the noise and the visual impact of those ramps. And you can see area 5 and 6 to either side of that. Those are really premier locations for redevelopment potentially to take place, and this will help to give that a better chance. What we also are proposing is that the wall, the brownstone wall at the park, would stay in place opposite these ramps, that it's very important that we have that sort of sheltering of the headlights coming off the highway into the park. But we expect that most of the brownstone wall and the viaduct will be removed as part of the project, not being necessary, and actually opening up this space into Bushnell Park. The view into Bushnell Park will be really important. If we have Bushnell Way that is just sitting up on an elevation separated by a wall from the park, it's a very different concept than Bushnell Park North and how that integrates so well with the park. The next capping that I'm showing you here are some concepts for what's called Station Place. And this is just to the east of the new train station, north of Asylum Avenue, and it's important to have a plaza in this location, really the front door to the station, and making the station part of the community. The next area is what's called the promenade, these green areas labeled E, and this ties the whole development then up into the Asylum Hill area, and it's more of a promenade than a park, and ties that area into the train station also. The next area is what we're calling Farmington Plaza, Area F. That is over the highway. It's designed to be an active plaza. And then finally, we have an area called Broad Street Fields. This is G. It would be a large expanse of open space, and the idea would be that it would need to be activated with some type of athletic use. And then we're showing Area H, planted buffer along Broad Street. However, one of the changes that the P&Z Commission asked that we add to this plan is the idea that the capping over 84 continue to the west side of Flower Street. And that's what that dashed line is showing off to the very western edge of this drawing over top of the lowered highway. Finally, Union Station adaptive reuse. We want to see this be sort of a 24/7 kind of area with some flexible space for public programs, restaurants, classrooms, studios, exhibit space, small-scale office. The way this works with the surrounding streets, we're looking at Union Place becoming a shared street on that side of the station, and then on the Spruce Street side of the station, there's now a larger expanse of ground since the buses are no longer there, and actually the elevations have changed in such a way that we will be level coming into the Great Hall. This concept is showing the modern addition to Union Station having been removed, and rather than having stairs up into the Great Hall, because of the change in elevation of Spruce Street with Garden Street coming down, we'll be able to access directly into the Great Hall, which creates this space called Union Yard on the west side of the station that can provide places for cafes, for activity, more of a pedestrian space. And I have to confess, usually it's landscape architects and economic development people who make this presentation, so an engineer doesn't quite have the same flair with the material. Looking at financing and implementation strategies, this kind of project would need to be supported. If we look at what we're projecting could happen in terms of development, the development proposals here, this would require Hartford growing at a significantly faster pace than it has been to this point. But we think there are some opportunities to leverage the insurance cluster that we already have and the innovation place kind of efforts that are underway to move it forward. But it's not a done deal that the city could see all this development take place. And I'll show you some concepts. This is a cross-section through the development, through the center of the development, showing trains below the buildings, below the station, CT Fast Track coming in underground. But the key things that will be needed in the implementation strategy is creating the new roads and the parcels as part of the highway project, providing utilities, and starting with the sites that are on ground. Would like to look at our zoning and see how we can optimize any of our TOD overlay zones. The improved train station and bringing all the transit together will help provide greater impetus for TOD. And we already are getting questions from people who own property within the half mile of the proposed train station. It's very important that we really think about how we do this, what entity oversees the development to really make it happen. So I've got a couple of views. This is a view from looking from the Bushnell Park side at the development that could happen. The low facility on the right side of the drawing with the solar panels on top is the bus facility. The train station has sort of some crossing bracing across the front of it, if you see that up more towards the top of the drawing. Well, there are the labels. I should have brought that in already. And I think this one shows how essential that Garden Street extension is to the project. You can see the Farmington Avenue extension also. This is a view looking from Asylum Hill at the development and how it might be built. And this is all based on the zoning allowances in the current zoning regulation, what would be possible. And then it also shows infill of a number of surface parking lots, both north and east of the existing Union Station. So from here you can see that Capitol Way open space that's over the ramps and the Broad Street field, which would be the large open space piece. So finally, I just want to point out, if you look at this drawing, you can see this gives us a lot of opportunities. If you look at the depiction on the left and go south of our area of interest, opposite Bushnell Park, behind the LOB parking garage, it looks like there are more opportunities to try to create greater place over there, in a place that's just the back door right now. The back side of the LOB parking garage also offers a place where we can sort of continue this concept. And I want to thank Bill McCarskey for pointing that out and sharing some drawings along those lines to get us thinking about that. So that is the end of our presentation. Like I said, we'll send some information so you can take a look at the report itself if you're interested and dig deeper.
Does this have to be formally accepted by the DOT?
That would be a question for the DOT. I think City Council is going to be adopting it at their next council meeting. It's slated to be adopted.
So to answer that and all of this that's gone on with what the city's doing and what other input we've gotten from stakeholders is part of what we're considering and incorporating into the DIS as far as any other stakeholder input. And I don't know, is there anything else that we could? That's pretty much how we're looking at this plan. It's not something that's going to be looked at separately. It's part of the whole alternative analysis and environmental impact process.
So the land that's created above or on the caps will be owned by the city of Hartford or owned by the state?
Again, what happens with camping, there's a lot of things to be done. We're not at that point in this process. We're looking at the impacts when it gets into design, and we see how things flesh out, and all things and ownership and stuff could flesh out down the road. That's not at the point we're at.
I know we talked about the brownstone wall, keeping that in Bushmill Park, but I thought there was other historic, the state historic commission, is that the main reason you really want to keep the wall, that they were very for it, or is there, and not only is it just our wall, but is there other aspects of the project that the historic commission still has to weigh in on?
I believe the cultural resources report was draft and still is going to be refined. There's not a final report, is there?
I'm kind of going to be repeating myself, but again, that all those things will be discussed in the EIS as far as what we think the impacts are, and some of those would be, again, more design details as to how we expect them to go after the environmental impact statement. And as far as it goes with the city's report, that's what the report. I can't speak to how the city's document would be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, our report, the concept plan, if you look at it, you'll see that we indicate it's key that the viaduct and the brownstone wall not have to remain, that they limit our ability really to make this the kind of place we want it to be. We believe that with some of the roadway improvements that are required, the little sidewalk archway, that's just going to go. This is our opinion, the city, because the road needs to be wider. We need to open up that pedestrian way. And we don't see any value in keeping an old steel structure that no one's going to maintain in terms of the viaduct. And we think that removing the highway and then leaving all the viaduct as a dividing structure is not going to get us where we want to be.
Right, but I'm sorry, I thought you said you were keeping the wall.
Yeah, so.
Right?
We're keeping the wall,
That's what I was at, yeah.
keeping the wall opposite of where the ramps come off,
Right.
keeping a
That
remnant
section,
of
that's
wall.
what I meant.
And would that satisfy concerns? We don't know the answer to that.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand this. So when you go in for money for the I-84 project, will that also include funding for the new Union Station? Is that all in the package deal? And the bus, I mean, is that how that's?
A lot of this redevelopment and stuff like that will not necessarily be part of the project. We went over, we had a different presentation here, so I can't get back to there. But there are some things that this capital plan is much more outside of the project limits. So
So Union Station, the new Union Station and the bus, for train and bus, that is outside of the I-84, when you're going down to the federal government and making the package, that is outside of that, that's not going to be included. So is that something that has to be state bonded for new construction of the station?
the new station.
The new train station.
The new train station.
No,
and
that
new
would
bus
be part of
station.
that would be part of the project. But some of the things that
So it's part of the I-84, you go in for the package with the state money and the federal money for the full project.
there could be many different projects that make up what we're looking at here. This would not necessarily come out as one project. It would not necessarily be part of the same funding source. So again, where we are in the process, we are looking at impacts of what the project would be. We don't have a project beyond the limits of an environmental document. And so once we get through and talk about what the impacts are and understand that, then projects can be initiated, that funding has to be found and design has to be done. I know it seems that we are really far down because we've taken so long to get to where we are with this environmental document, but we're really still at a very early starting point. We're not even at 10% design on things. A lot of these are big concepts and a lot has to be done. So it's hard for us to speak to what is going to happen and what these projects are going to include that are way beyond the scope of getting to the finish line of the environmental document.
Well, maybe I'll just interject for a second. So the likely scenario, I think, getting back, Jackie, I think is our project as we see it will be the highway work, the new multimodal station, relocation of the fast track, and the relocation of the rail. Now, when you get into capping, a lot of the economic development and the things in Sandy's plan, we don't know how those would be funded or where they might fit into the bigger picture.
So this is the city plan that you just shared. What is the state, does the state have a plan too? Or have we seen, you have had multiple versions of a plan for this area?
Again, to the point that we've shown some concepts, but again, this is mostly a project addressing the highway, and we've looked at and we've delved into with the PAC a number of different things that could be feasible. But again, Andy kind of indicated where the limits of our project are right now. We're looking to build a highway, relocate the rail, get the multimodal station, and a lot of this other stuff will, we've looked at the impacts and see how that fits in, but that will again have to get fleshed out.
The city kind of has said, okay, here's what we propose, and I don't feel like I know exactly what the state's proposed, other than a whole bunch of different options. Have you landed on one option that you would push forward if you said no to this one?
Of some of those design details, no. They're again, the DAS is looking for an alternative of this highway configuration. And a lot of these other things are additional features that go beyond the highway.
I just got one. Aaron said I had to ask it, so I'm going to ask
Sure.
it.
Yeah, because I never speak for myself.
So like, you had to take a whack at this, right? And, we're talking about fall of 2020 for public input on the document, the whatever it is. Just haphazard a guess. I know you're gonna say, well, we don't know better, but like, when does phase one start? Like, when do I start to see a railroad track?
The earliest we would see construction would be the mid-20s.
So,
Or the later
24, 25, 26.
That would probably be, we're looking at design and that.
And that would be like phase one. So that's when you guys were talking about that 4-year phase, 4 years, so you're gonna
Correct.
close down a portion of capital and build the track. That's when we're talking about, so mid-20s.
Mid to late 20s, mid-20s probably design, late 20s construction at the earliest.
We have retirement parties every year.
Anything else? Okay, thank you again.
My name is Jay Stan McCauley, and I do business as Lightsource Productions. I provide professional services in the area of strategic video communications. First, what we do is we help you craft your message using what I call the rule of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. We do event documentation, content acquisition, full-scale productions, editing, and of course distribution through our social media television network. And with social media, video is more important now than it has ever been. Whether you're talking big business, small business, nonprofit, church, or just an individual. Let's say you plan you're planning an event, a wedding, whatever the case may be. But let's say a big event, but no video. And you spent all this time, all these hours to put this event on, and maybe 100, 200 people attend the event. But more important than that is that thousands could attend by watching it on social media. But of course, you don't think about this until after the event is over. You can't afford not to capture it for social media. And despite what people think, I am affordable. Give me a call. Let's plan your next video project and share it with the world on my social media television network. I promise you that you will have the attention of one person, me.